Whatever happens to tech. Should I wait for the audience? All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is Wednesday, February 9th, Town Council Workshop.
There's some reverberation.
Yeah, if you guys are on Zoom.
Shut your audio off.
Your computer all the way down.
That was me.
Yeah.
Sorry. No problem.
Leave it to say.
Just to break this. Welcome again. This is a workshop of the Scarborough Town Council. We are meeting tonight to get an update from the Downs team and their consultants on the vision for the town center design and the community center that could possibly reside within the town center. This is a piece or a part of the exemption request that came to us last year. And I thought it would be a good idea for us to all get educated, sold, whatever you want to call it, about the vision for our future town center in Scarborough. So I'm excited to see what you have to offer. Dan, it looks like you have a full slate of team members here to help walk us through it. And it's mostly going to be a presentation. There's going to be time for Q&A. We're not going to have a full build out plan, obviously, tonight. This is, more focused on the vision. So with that, thank you for coming. And I'll turn it over to Dan to introduce your team.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go up to the podium. Share my screen here. Everybody see that okay? Well, great. Thank you, Chairman Clucci and Town Council. We really appreciate the opportunity to schedule this workshop to do just that, update you on our town center plans, and really have our consultants kind of lead us through the presentation. We've been hard at work really since the first workshop we had back in December, and are trying to be responsive to some of the council's questions and also really follow the guidance and the lead of the downtown committee's hard work last year. So Cube 3, Brian O'Connor, I think is going to lead the presentation. Will come up next. And we've done a lot of educating Brian in terms of the Downs project overall, the work of the downtown committee, the desires of the council, some of our discussions. And Brian, he has such a big team because he's needed it the last few months, kind of getting up to speed and kind of getting our plan to where it is today. So that'll be the bulk of the presentation. Also, Tom is actually a panelist. He's joining virtually. He works with Jim at Camoin. He's going to briefly talk about kind of the need for housing. That's been a question, and how it relates to the downtown design and the town center, which Brian will also touch on a few of the fiscal implications. And then we'll kind of wrap up. I'm going to provide some comment on under public benefits that are kind of new that the council's asked about. So let's see, with that, the screen's blank for some reason. Maybe Paul, you are going to have to.
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't know if it's just a data thing or.
Let me know. You want me to try it?
Yeah.
Ready your sharing before I.
Apologize.
Sorry. Dan, I'm pretty in sync with your cadence, so we'll try this one.
Okay, go to the next one then. So I really already introduced this, so we can jump to the next one. Before I turn it over to Brian, I did want to mention, I guess back when.
Like I said.
Before,
You're going the wrong way.
in addition to the discussion tonight, we also provided the council a submission on Friday. I'm not going to go through the content of that, but the council had a lot of great questions at your past workshop. So within that submission are a number of other things that we're not going to walk through this evening, but you have it. If there are questions that come up after the workshop on any of those kind of Q&A format, we're happy to answer those.
And Dan, just for the public's benefit, that submission is included with the agenda packet.
Correct.
for
Yeah.
tonight's work.
So it's online as well. One key piece before I have Brian kind of jump in on the town center details. We did want to kind of frame where he started. And I think as the council understands, but maybe the public doesn't understand. So this exemption application is for a specific area within the Down. So it's a 90-acre area that includes the town center that Brian's been working on, and then some surrounding area. And the exemption also is specific in terms of unit types. It's not a full exemption. Within that 90 acres, it's for units that are either part of a mixed-use building or part of a multifamily building. So I know the council understands that, but I wanted to make sure the public understands that. The next slide, Paul, shows that area. I think the council's seen this before, but the difference is we've added in Cube 3's work, the new town center layout into that exemption area that we've talked about before to add a lot more context to the exemption request. And we've provided these statistics before, but this is informed, in part by the half-mile radius to the center that the downtown committee reviewed over the last year and recommended. And it should be noted that these are kind of 90 raw acres. A lot is going to happen within that area. It's not just housing. Obviously, the town center, roads, stormwater, that type of thing. So I just wanted to frame that in terms of the exemption area. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Brian and talk about kind of the main event and walk you through his work on the downtown plan.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it. We're looking forward to sharing some of the work we've been doing on the vision for the town center. I'm going to try to, if you could jump to the next slide, if you don't mind, one more. So just by way of introduction, really quick. I'm one of the founding partners of Cube 3. We're about 140 person design firm with offices sort of up and down the East Coast. We have an office in Boston, Lawrence, Miami, and we do work all over the country. And the only reason that's relevant or important to you guys is that this sort of the way we approach planning, like this town center planning, is that, we really do look to other work that we've done, not because contextually it matters, but just because there are really strong and important planning principles that really need to be applied to anything. So we do this type of work around the country. We're really excited to be here. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys. And like Dan said, we spent a lot of time, drinking through a fire hose here as quickly as we can to learn as much as we can. There's been a lot of great work done, but we're really excited to kind of share where the thinking has gone. So very quickly, we're going to kind of outline some of the goals. We are really focused on making sure that as a group, we're targeting very specifically what we're trying to do. So we always write goal statements and we think very, carefully about what we're trying to achieve. We're going to then review the plan, focus on a couple areas within the plan, and then share some quick images that we've been developing that talk to the vibe and the character and the feel of what this place is. Because we think at the end of the day, this is a town center for Scarborough. It's really important to understand what the look and feel of this place is. So these are the planning goals. It's gonna seem annoying probably, but I really do think it's important to just pause for a minute and kind of walk through these. This idea of generating and creating a sense of place that's community focused, not for the residents of the Downs, but for the town, is really, really kind of the core goal here. And so that's kind of the first thing that we always have in our mind. We think about public spaces that resonate with the community. Public spaces that work here and that mean something to you here are different than Raleigh, North Carolina. They're different than anywhere. And so it's really important to make sure there's a sensitivity to what we're trying to create here. Public amenities that are really part of creating a community that works 24/7, range of experiences from grass areas and broad lawns to retail and active uses. density and activity, I think you're going to hear this as a theme that we're going to hit on a bit tonight. Supporting the kind of place that we're trying to create here requires a certain amount of density, and it's a certain amount of density that comes not just from commercial use, but also from housing, and more importantly, housing, because that really is a 24-hour use. And then we always look to not only other plans and studies that we've done, but what's going on nationally. There are really great planning principles that are out there that can help create these spaces. Looking at examples around the country of what works and what doesn't is really important to sort of forming the right answer for you guys. Next. So the first thing we did, Dan and his team sort of walked us through the grandstand, and we spent a lot of time there. And I could sum up this entire slide by saying the grandstands are wildly uncode compliant the way they are right now. And there's really effectively no way to make them code compliant. So, we did a very sort of detailed and thoughtful analysis of the building, and it's everything from the structure, which doesn't meet any lateral bracing codes. It's out of date. The entire structure of the grandstands would have to get replaced. The walls, the roof, the glass wall itself, the building systems, ADA accessibility, like pretty much everything. So it's like, we estimated very conservatively that 90% of everything there would have to completely go and get rebuilt. In actual fact, it's more like 150%, because by the time you're done doing that, you're kind of putting so much energy into something it's not even there. So I think what we did is we sort of thought long and hard about what that meant. And we thought there's a better opportunity to create a destinational sense of place here that's going to mean something by finding a way to echo that, by finding a way to create something that is new, but has that sort of, there's a flavor to it that reminds you of where you are. So we just wanted to touch on that again. This is the sort of exemption area that we're talking about, and let's just dive right in. We're going to focus in that red zone. So this is a little bit of an enlargement of that town center. This is really just a reference slide for you guys. We're going to see different pieces of this plan, but this is to really call out the different uses that we're proposing in here. And you can see sort of right there in the middle, there's a collection of pink buildings and more brown tone buildings. And that's really sort of the heart of where we are here, with mixed use buildings and very public buildings, residential kind of around the edge, office and commercial kind of around the edge on the bottom. And it's just, you're going to see these colors. And so once again, I think as we laid out this plan and we thought about everything we were trying to achieve, the centerpiece is this public space, and it's the public amenities and the access to them and how they feel and how they work together that really drives what we're doing. So the plan approach really focused on this idea of, if you're going to create a destination, how do you get there from a pedestrian standpoint, from a vehicular standpoint? How do you define the place you're trying to get in a way that it feels public, that a way that you feel like you've arrived? And then how do we support that by placing the most public buildings in very visible and prominent locations within that plan? And then think about, how do we really stitch this whole thing together to create a sense of community that's pedestrian friendly, that is walkable streets, that is hardscape, softscape, and other elements that kind of all tie it together. And so we're going to dig into each one of these, but just beyond the color coding, just to kind of walk you around the plan very quickly, we have this central core piece that we're going to zoom in on here in a minute, but to the upper left, we have a recreation center, which is fairly substantial and connects over to the left to what we think is a great opportunity for some recreational fields. We then have a community center below that, which is a very tight relationship both to the sort of edge of Old Downs Road, which is really our primary retail street, but also has an extremely strong relationship to this very public core area that we're trying to create. Mixed use buildings along the bottom edge of that street, office to the left, a large grocery store, which is really well integrated into the overall vehicular and pedestrian planning, which I'll share in a little bit. And then we have sort of residential around the upper right, and then we have light retail as well, and a hotel kind of drifting down towards the main entry at the bottom. So if we zoom in here, when we get to this public space, how do we define it? How do we think about what it means? And so some of the components that you're going to see in here that I touched on lightly are really the sort of public lawn areas, these outdoor spaces. There's a tendency in a lot of urban and suburban and town center planning to just create this green space. And that doesn't mean anything. And so we start to think about these as like front yards and backyards. And we think really carefully about how big they want to be. How do we create variety in the size and character of these spaces so that they all stitch together? And then how do we frame the whole thing so that it feels like a place that resonates? So right in the middle, there's a pink building that says central amenity. We think this is, in effect, the echo of the grandstand. And you'll see some images of it. This is really a placemaking piece that has a flexible program. You know, Dan and his team have been working hard on what that is, and we'll share some images of what we think it could be, but it really becomes the core and the heart of this place. It's right at the main intersection. It's offset a little towards the front, so we're managing the yard space in front of it. Immediately to the left, you have the community center. Up to the upper left, you have the rec center. And then the other thing you're going to notice is sort of that whole bottom edge along Old Down Roads. This is where the mixed use buildings are. All of these buildings in brown have pretty much complete active retail or restaurant amenity use at the ground floor. So you have this open space on one side of the street with this central amenity and these broad lawns. And on the other side of the street, you have a very active, transparent, and visible retail sort of edge. And I think the vision is some of it is traditional retail, but I think a lot of it really is also where do we put exciting restaurants? Where do we put things that are going to generate that idea of having outdoor activity? So you can also see in this plan, there are large plaza areas that exist sort of at the corners and the edges of these buildings. The sidewalk area in front against Old Downs Road is intentionally deep. And I'll hit on it in a minute, but one of the things that drives the core of this plan is making sure that as you drive or flow through it, you have the right character and feel to these streets, the dimensional width of the streets, the space between buildings, where the street trees are, where you parallel park, all of these things are really, really important. And so this is just a quick diagram that sort of highlights a couple of the things we're trying to do, this balance of passive and active space, the Old Downs retail frontage. We want, as you drive through this space adjacent to it, if you're driving sort of in a horizontal direction across the bottom of this page, we want you to know when you're entering this core. We want you to know when you're in the middle, and we want you to know when you're leaving. So there's a real focus on paving pattern, building position, creating edges, and creating continuity within that experience so you know where you are. We want all these spaces to be meaningful. So those three circles are kind of the center and either of the ends. And then we also think really hard about how do we move people through and around this space in a way that doesn't always intersect with cars, but becomes a meaningful way to live in the space and to move through it. So the central amenity behind it, there's this little piece that you probably notice says flex space. We think this is a really, really exciting opportunity to do some outdoor flexible programming, whether it's a skating rink at certain times of the year or other, summer activities. You'll also notice that it's very deliberately connected and intersecting with that central amenity building, which on the right-hand side has this really, broad overhang that allows some of that flex space to come under the building, creating these sort of layers of really engaging space. I think that's about it on this one. And now we're going to share a couple of quick views, guys. So this is just the orientation slide. So we are coming up to Old Downs Road from the entry to the south here. What you're going to see in a second is sort of a mixed use building on the right-hand side, a mixed use building on the left-hand side, and you're going to be looking right towards that central amenity building. So this is a quick view of what we think this could be. We think there's a really important diversity of architectural character and language that we want to see here. This place doesn't want to be sort of a monolithic application of a style or a color or a texture. And we really want these very, very transparent, open, glassy retail spaces at the ground floor. You can start to see a little bit of them right-hand side. The rhythm of parallel parking, broad sidewalks, seating areas, lighting, street trees, these things all really contribute to that sense of place. But just as important as those things is what's the vertical expression look like? Large windows, balconies that lean out and connect to these different spaces, and really a very rich sort of palette of materials. So these are concept drawings, obviously, but I think at this level, you want to really feel like it's not designed by one person at one time. It also doesn't want to feel too fake, like, Christmas tree shops kind of thing. So you really have to work carefully at establishing sort of a design vernacular and a design language. We call them design guidelines or sets of rules that certain things should live within. And so we've been working with Dan and his team on trying to really develop what those are. Also in that, also in that image, in the distance there, sort of where the perspective goes to its vanishing point, you can see this really like strong roof structure and columns coming down and what appears to be open space. That's where this central amenity building has this large flying roof that really comes out. It's very high up in the air, creating this really amazing indoor-outdoor space that can start to respond and connect to that outdoor flex space. And these retail edges that you're seeing here are either restaurant. I think where we are right now in the left-hand building, the brick building on the left, that we're programming restaurant. In the ground floor over there, outdoor seating, broad areas allowed for that. And then there's residential above these. These are the mixed-use buildings. Now what we've done is walked a little further down the street, and this notch we're standing in is actually, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is one of the primary restaurant locations we're contemplating. I think the other one might be across the corner in the other building. And what you're going to see here is sort of the front edge of that central amenity building, and we're looking kind of diagonally across the street towards the community center, which you'll see a little bit in the distance. So this is the kind of character we're trying to create here, where there's integrated seating, cars, the outdoor seating, the more casual seating, buildings that kind of lean out into the street a little bit with pergolas and catenary lighting. And over on the other side, you can see like integrated balconies that allow for direct connection of residents to these public areas. And then in the distance here, you can see the community center, like right through the center of the page there. And then the central amenity building, which we see as a sort of multi-story building on the left-hand side with this really amazing overhang. And then if you jump to the next image, it's sort of a night shot of the same thing. Again, when we're thinking about the planning and the active uses and how this works, we have to think about every season and we have to think about every time of the day, because these spaces sort of live and die as beautiful destination places, depending on how well they adapt to that. You can design something that worked great in the summer, and in the winter, it's a miserable place to be, you know? So we have to be really thoughtful about how these spaces work in every season. And again, these are really important characteristics that we use when we're designing these spaces to think about flexibility of use, whether it's brewery, restaurants, skating, what are the uses for the flexible space? I think in truth, a lot of the program pieces here, I would imagine are going to be a real collaborative element between the town and the Downs. I mean, this is sort of a community place, right? And so some of the programming for these pieces are community, but we want to really integrate softscape, hardscape, comfortable public seating, and then tree placement is a really important one. We tend to try to shy away from having, you know, hard and fast rules about every 15 feet or every 30 feet or what it is. We think you want to evaluate every sort of aspect of where you are and think, is it better to have a grove of trees here and maybe none here? So I think sort of the character and quality of how trees are being used in the landscape is something else that we spend a lot of time thinking about. So now we're kind of looking, you can see the town center in the middle. We're kind of looking at the left edge here, and we're really focusing on these public buildings. We think this is the right location for these because of their ability to not only connect to this town green or this town center that we're creating, but also to have a little bit of a relationship up to the left and off the page to the innovation center, and then down to the grocer, which lives right off the page to the bottom. We want to create, you know, not only these red arrows are sort of the horizontal pedestrian connections that are really meaningful in terms of tying the town center together, but also thinking about how you flow from the bigger plan. And I think the other thing here is just one of the core pieces to the success of the plan and of the pieces where they are is thinking about the engagement of the residential use here. The residential eyes on the park, eyes on the common areas, active, walk out the front door, across the street, you're in the park, you're walking across the park to the community center. That sort of cross-pollination of everything that happens in the middle is really only supported by an adequate kind of residential density. And so you'll notice in all these diagrams, the residential is really sort of framing this central area. Okay, sorry, I just got to take a sip of water. So here now we're standing right in front of the community center, and we're going to be looking back in the other direction. This is kind of a longer view, but we wanted to kind of show the retail edge and some of the open public spaces here. So you can see just on the right-hand edge, it's sort of very gray in this view. It's in shadow, but this is sort of the front of the community center. And we envision a very sort of open, beautiful hardscape plaza, integrated trees. We've also woven some grass pads in here, which we think are really nice. And you're sort of looking over one of the side lawn areas and back towards that sort of active main street, which is really populated by all this retail use that we're projecting. Again, we're looking at the mixed use buildings. So all of the floors above that ground plane are residential use here. And you see, we're kind of carefully stepping the buildings at the upper floors and thinking about the mass and the scale of these as they relate to that pedestrian experience. I think if you went straight down this street, I had mentioned these connections to the grocer. We think the grocery store is not only a critical amenity for Scarborough and really thinking about how it relates to the broader community, but we also want it to feel very connected to this town center place. And so there are clear vehicular access points from town center, not just from the broader community, and there are really strong pedestrian access points to it as well. Okay, so now we're kind of across the street behind what we were just looking at. And this is kind of what I was referring to here. The mixed use buildings sort of activate that front edge along Old Downs Road. They also provide retail frontage to the southern side, or plan south here, view south, towards some of this open parking. And we're allowing very deliberate pedestrian penetration through these blocks that are not too large to allow that flow and to allow those pedestrian connections to happen. We want the activity on Old Downs Road to feel like it's connected to the grocer. We think, I don't know what the programming is yet in the grocer, but if it's anything like what we see every day in stores now, there's going to be grab and go. There's going to be like quicker, things that you could grab there that really serve not only the commercial working pieces of this broader master plan, but also the people that live here in a much more sensitive way. So we think it's important to make sure that all of those connections work. They're all meaningful and they're all tied to the broader planning. So this view is sort of on Old Downs Road, and we're now looking to the right. So when we pull up the image, you'll notice the community center will be immediately on your left, and we're going to be looking down this corridor. You'll see the central amenities building again, and you'll get a flavor for this retail edge we're trying to create. So on the left, you have the community center. I think in this case, we're sort of looking at the edge of the pool over there, very transparent, very glassy. You can see this larger sort of central amenity building in the distance. You can get a little bit of a scale feel for what we're thinking the character of this street is. Again, we're proposing parallel parking on virtually every street edge through this entire town center. It slows down traffic a little bit, which is important. It feels more pedestrian friendly. It gives people convenient access and places to park. And I think if you see on the right-hand side of this image, you can see the edge of one of these retail buildings is sort of set back enough from the street to allow old growth trees to come in here over time, develop shade trees over lawn areas, seating areas. And then if you were to make a right in between these buildings, you'd be cutting right down towards the grocer. And these buildings are sort of very deliberately placed to allow corners to read and retail to be expressed so that you just don't have a sort of very hard street wall and you're getting a variety of experience as you're walking down the street. This is another night shot. We tend to do a lot of this day, night. We tend not to do a lot of images of the winter season because they don't look so good. But the programming and thinking about that is really, really important. I think one of the things that is not as evident in this rendering, but it's really, really core to the way we think about how these work is at night, where is the lighting? How does the lighting work? Is it the kind of lighting you'd want to go out at 10 o'clock at night and walk the dog and feel safe and feel like you've got eyes that can see you and things like that. So there's sort of a couple of different levels of lighting we look at. It's not only street lights, it's building lights, it's bollard lighting. It's like just how it feels to walk around. And we all know where we're comfortable and where we're not. But I think it's important to make sure that things that work during the day have to work at night too. And so it's important to do things like we're doing here, where we have a community center that's probably going to be open some nights a lot later than retail across the street. So you sort of always have this back and forth balance of where you have eyes on you and where it feels comfortable to walk. So if we kind of scoot over to the right a little bit, this is, I think in large part, the heart of the conversation here, which is all of this great stuff really relies on a certain residential density, but it's not just about the density, it's about how you do it and where you do it. We think that really resonates and is important. So we think about every residential building that's being proposed is doing something really important to this plan. It's either framing the edges of this town center, or it's creating direct access street front units, which you can see a little bit along Old Downs Road so that you have front doors on the street, or it's really creating sort of a blend of very public access and public view spaces around this town center, or these little areas you see that live between these buildings that are a little bit more private for the residents of these buildings. So it's again, this sort of balance of public-private with the emphasis on public, but allowing for some of this private, because I think people that live here are going to want to feel a little bit of that too. So it's the location of the buildings, it's the character of the buildings, and it's how they kind of work together. And I'm not going to get into this in too much detail because I could spend a day on this alone, but the character of the streets are critical. Like the dimensions between the buildings are critical. What you're putting into these places that you're trying to create are really, really important. And these are just some of the things that we think about. And we've spent a lot of time with Dan and his team kind of making sure that we're getting this right so far. Every street shouldn't feel the same. You know, the character of these streets should be different, but they should be appropriate to the use. And so the plan you're seeing has a lot of kind of background work built into it to really right size the way all the sidewalks and the public plaza areas work. And then this is, again, I think I mentioned this is kind of the theme here. When we look at planning efforts, you know, here in particular, but really everywhere, the most important thing that we look at is how do we tie the vision for what we want this place to be collectively as a community to a residential density that allows that place to survive and to feel the way we want it to feel. It's really important to have enough people living here in the right places so that when you come here, if you don't live here, you feel like you're joining an active community that's part of your community. And that only works if there's already people there. So, you know, our proposal, I think collectively here is one that's been really thoughtfully balanced between the square footage and the allocation of public space for the rec center, the community center, all of the retail, all of that stuff really only succeeds in large part if we allocate enough residential density to really make that feel like it means something. So I think with that, I'm going to get off my my soapbox and let Dan finish.
That's fine. Actually, Tom is,
Oh, sorry.
Tom's next and I'll wrap up.
Same slide, Dan. Am I sticking with this?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he needs to be made a panelist.
Yeah, I invited him a couple of seconds, minutes ago. Tom, if you can hear me, I'm going to invite you as a panelist.
Hi there.
Welcome,
Can you
Tom.
all hear me?
We can.
Great. All right, Dan, should I just go ahead or?
Yeah, please, Paul will advance slides as you see fit.
Okay. Great. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Duretsky. I'm the Director of Research at Camoy Associates. We're an economic development firm based in Saratoga Springs, New York. We've been working with the Downs team for several years now on market analysis, fiscal impact analysis, and other types of analysis and planning for the project. My colleague Jim Demesis is there with you in person. We've been involved really in this project from close to the start and seeing it develop over time. We're really looking forward to kind of seeing it shift into this town center phase. So tonight I'll be hitting on the fiscal benefits that the town center will have for the town, and really build on Brian's discussion on why having a concentration of housing in the town center as part of that mix of uses is really important to making the project work. So both from the perspective of market demand and also in terms of the fiscal benefit that we'll show some numbers on. So why is concentration of housing important? So, having apartments and condos in the town center is really key for driving customer activity and foot traffic, and serves as an anchor for retail businesses and restaurants that are located there. So, the residents of this housing are a built-in market for the smaller local businesses that we want to see in the town center. And those businesses, because they're small, they really strongly rely on pass-by traffic, whether it's pedestrians or vehicles, to drive their sales. And having that housing there, those built-in residents, really helps with that aspect of their business. Another point is that the town center site is not on a major thoroughfare. It's internal to the larger down site, and therefore it needs some housing as part of the mix to drive potential customers into the site. Without that critical mass of housing, it makes it harder, again, for smaller retail businesses to compete with other stores that might have locations directly on major roads like Route 1. It's also an important piece of the puzzle for creating a vibrant district. Some of the things that Brian was talking about around having a district that's activated, that has the look and feel of a downtown. Having those residents living directly in that town center ensures that it retains that activation, that vibrancy at all times of the day. Another point is, Scarborough already has its share of shopping centers, and without the housing, the town center would kind of be at risk of becoming that same shopping center model. So including housing is really a differentiating factor that will appeal to both businesses and customers and make a special place within the town. And then finally, the fact that apartments and condos can be offered at lower price points compared to low density single family homes, that is important for communities like Scarborough and communities throughout Maine and the country that are looking for ways to integrate a mix of housing price points. So, incorporating apartments, condos in the town center is a way to offer those differing price points. So kind of shifting to the discussion of fiscal benefits, it's, having those condos and apartments really paves the way for that mix of uses and drives and defines the Downs project. All these uses together is critically supported by the concentration of housing units, and that's what will generate the positive fiscal benefit to the town's budget. So we'll go through some numbers on that. So on this slide here, it's showing the projected growth in assessed value from the Downs through 2028, right? And so this is based on the build out of the town center. The graph shows kind of the breakout of the different uses that we're projecting here if the plan is able to proceed as planned. So you see the taxable assessed value really growing over time into the future. By 2028, it would be 5 times greater than what it is today, meaning, the value of the Downs currently as built. In 2028, with the town center, the value would be 5 times greater than that. And then beyond generating revenues, this growth in assessed value is a big positive just generally for the town's fiscal position and bond rating. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the growing tax revenue projected to be generated by the Downs into the future. That's driven by that growing assessed value that we showed previously. By 2028, the revenues from the downs are estimated to reach about 4.7 million per year. And that will make up an estimated 6% of total town revenue. So it's a significant chunk of future town revenues. And so this is showing only incremental revenues that the town retains per the CEA agreement. I just wanted to stress that. Okay, and then here we're going a step further and looking specifically at the net fiscal benefit to the town, right? So this slide looks at how that revenue on the last slide will be used. Part of it, that's the part shown in blue on the bars of this chart, the blue bars, that's the part that goes toward operating costs associated with the downs. So that supports things like public safety, schools, community services. And those costs were all estimated using the assumptions from the town's ROI model. The rest of it, the yellow at the top of the bar, that's the surplus benefit to the town. That's the revenue that is beyond what is needed to fund municipal services. That's the additional funding that the town can put toward other uses. And that surplus reaches 1.1 million per year in 2028. And to put that in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to the town's entire library operating budget, or it's also half of the community services budget, or it's 4 times SEDCO's budget. So it's a pretty sizable amount of surplus that can be used for various purposes. If that surplus was used for tax reduction, it would represent a 2% reduction in the town's mill rate, for example. So, from 2022 to 2028, we project 4.9 million in surplus to the town from the downs if it's allowed to proceed as planned. That surplus will grow over time, as you can see the yellow bars there growing each year into the future, and really continue over the lifetime of the downs for, decades into the future. And then just as an example for how departmental operating costs are factored into this model, we have a slide that zooms in a little bit into the public safety budget. That's something that the council had asked about. So this is showing the cost to serve the downs when it comes to fire and police costs specifically. So these costs here can be thought of as making up part of the blue bar on the prior slide that was showing costs, right? So these costs, together with the schools, the library, community services, et cetera, those are all already factored into the net fiscal benefit shown previously. As the downs is built out, of course, the cost to serve will also grow, but the revenues generated by the downs will more than cover those costs and in fact leave a surplus left over to fund other things that the town wants to fund or even reduce taxes, right? So at the end of the day, in order for the town to be able to maximize these fiscal benefits that we're projecting here and generate the surplus, the project really needs to be a market-driven mix of uses, including both commercial and residential in the town center. And without all those critical pieces in play, the project isn't going to work and the town's fiscal upside will be at risk. It just won't reach its full potential. So that's just kind of the point I'm trying to make here. The critical nature of the housing is really an important factor in driving the fiscal surplus that the town can benefit from. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dan.
Thanks, Tom. I'm just going to wrap up with some kind of final public benefits. Really, we're bringing this slide up because since our original application, the town has the findings, so a recent community survey. So we wanted to kind of just tie together at a high level, and I realize the council is aware of many of these, but the public may not be, kind of the relationship to what the town center and proceeding with the project through this exemption can do for executing kind of town-wide public benefits. One is obviously Brian's presentation and the exciting kind of town center and the opportunities for a community center to be a focal point in that plan and really add obviously a public benefit and add to the quality of life to the entire community the exemption would be needed to proceed to do that. Another thing that was highlighted that in the community survey findings, obviously, is traffic. We hear a lot about traffic. And I know the council understands this, but the public may not, where the Downs townwide traffic improvement plan is going to be addressing the vast majority of traffic congestion on the major corridors in town. And through the agreement we have with impact fees through the council, but also Maine DOT and the bulk of money coming from the project, those improvements can be made without kind of the town taking on any financial burdens for it. Tom and Brian have already highlighted housing and housing types and affordability, kind of meeting the affordability and the housing needs and choices of the community, of the region, and of kind of the workforce. Obviously, that's a big issue, kind of region-wide at this point. So this exemption does that. Tom touched on the substantial, net fiscal benefits of continuing the project as planned, particularly the mixed-use development and the value of the mixed-use town center development. And then kind of lastly, continuing with the project as per the original plans, with the town center, as per the town's comp plan, and proceeding on those public benefits we've already identified in Appendix A. So we just wanted to touch on that. And I guess lastly, Paul, just obviously we want to have some Q&A, and we're just thinking about next steps and coordinating with the council. I know Jeff Levine and his team are reviewing, and I expect a report being coming soon. So we look forward to working with the council on the findings of that report. We also want to collaborate on the community center site, where Brian has some great ideas in terms of our layout, but we need to have a dialogue around kind of specifics to make sure we get the right size, we get the right kind of orientation, and kind of vet that out with you, following this workshop in the coming weeks. And then related is sort of schedule, so that we are responsive to your questions and kind of can proceed with this process to a successful end. So I think with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you guys so much. I want to say, I think you nailed it. Right? In terms of why we were here, understanding the vision, you did a fantastic job of helping us to understand and conveying what that is. In terms of some of the next steps, Stan, and the financials, we do have our own consultants that are going to help us understand those details. I do anticipate releasing some preliminary findings from them after this meeting. And then our next step will be to meet with them publicly so that they can help us understand all the nuances and details of what we're getting into. With that, I'd like to open it up to the council for questions, comments. Councilor Katarina.
Yeah, thanks. That was an interesting presentation and got me thinking in a few ways myself. And with permission of the chair, I have a couple things that I might as well. Just out of curiosity, the public space itself, what's the acreage of just the public space in the downtown, more or less?
Probably about an acre.
I think it's about 3. Oh, go ahead.
Just the piece around the public amenity.
Yeah, more, yeah,
Yeah,
Square.
yeah, it's probably 2 acres,
okay,
Sorry,
including the public amenity and
yeah,
like retail and
yeah. Like the town green, so to speak.
Yep.
Okay, build out time, when I look at the drawings and renderings of the buildings, I mean, they're good sized buildings. I know I'm in real estate, for those of you who may not know that, but with supply chain and labor shortages.
Yeah.
What are we looking at for build out time? If we gave you a blank check and said, yeah, go ahead and build, out of curiosity.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm going to do that, but.
yeah, so what's really interesting, I know everybody's been hearing about labor shortages and material shortages, and what's really been interesting is work we're doing in the region. The costs are going up, but the durations aren't changing.
Okay.
And so we're really seeing like a lot more flexibility. I don't know, you might disagree with this, I don't know, but we're seeing a lot more flexibility and creativity on the construction management side for how to get things done activities are overlapping a little bit more. Things that have longer lead times are known now and they're being pre-ordered. So I would say at the beginning of the whole COVID situation, it was a nightmare and everybody just stopped working. But I think where we are now, the lead times on the products and the construction materials that are hard to get are known
Okay.
and they're being pre-ordered. And so I think we're seeing, I don't know if you would agree, Dan, but I think we're not seeing durations of construction really change. We're just seeing the costs.
But but I guess my question, the bottom line of my question is we started tomorrow.
Okay, so like,
How
so
long is it gonna take to build this out?
that's a Dan question, but if you were
Dan
to,
question.
if you were to build one building, one of these larger
Right.
buildings just from scratch, starting tomorrow, it's 24 months. So it really
Yeah.
becomes a question of how much overlap, how do you
Right.
phase it? I would think.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously market demand.
Yeah.
And, thinking about having some residential early is a key piece to kind of start activation. Having some initial mixed-use buildings. The grocery is a big component of this, obviously the community center. So it's hard to say, it's hard to predict the future in terms of build out. It's success of the design, success of kind of attracting end users early and it gaining momentum.
Right.
So I don't want to say it's 3 or 15, I think it's about the right ingredients early on and getting some momentum for the project.
And the reason I ask is not to make you say, oh yeah, we'll have this all done in 3 years, because that would be unrealistic, but just to give, I'm asking these questions as much for the public, so they
Right.
get a sense of, what we're talking about. And then the last thing is just a thought that I had, because when I looked at the drawings of renderings of these buildings and particularly multi-use, where you're gonna have residential above your retail or restaurant or whatever on the bottom with the residential above. Yeah, that's where the interesting conundrum comes in with numbers, I guess, because in order to build a building, you have to have the permits for the living space for the buildings you're gonna build and when you're gonna build them. And if there's limits on that, that could make a mess of things. What do you think?
Yeah, the mixed use buildings are one building, right?
Right.
You're building all of the structure, the infrastructure, the preparation. So if you're building any of the mixed use buildings, the residential has to be part of the same timeline.
Right, exactly. And that was just the thing that popped into my
Yeah.
head that I just want to mention to put out there
Yeah.
again for the public and my fellow counselors about, those are the things you got to weigh.
It's a great point. There is a massive difference between a standalone single story retail and building what we're proposing here for
Right.
sure.
Right.
It's a great point.
I'm all done. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions or comments? Counselor Anderson?
No, I thought this was an excellent presentation. I think you guys honestly, like Councilor Tucci said, kind of nailed it for me, at least in terms of helping to talk a little bit about what's there, what the benefit is, and looking at the financials. So I appreciate all of that work that went into it, because I think you guys did a great job. Just a couple of comments. When it comes to the retail space, like, again, I'm visually challenged, even with the beautiful pictures you guys shared, to like really picture myself there and understand like what is the like how grand is it. So can you talk again a little bit more about, and maybe like use some examples that I can look up later, the public can look up later, of like what does that mean in terms of retail square footage? Because again, for me personally, when I look at the map you show where you show the brown, it feels a little underwhelming. And I don't know if that's just because I can't picture it, or is it really just small in terms of retail because we're getting all of that great civic space that's kind of, maybe less traditional.
That's a great question. I think to give you some good references, I'm going to want to go back and make sure we're looking at the right places. I think that the really important distinction between what's trying to be proposed here versus a purely sort of retail community is that I think the blend of the community center and the rec center and some of these other, and that central amenity building, these are public, really important public pieces to the plan. And it's not a pure shopping district, right? So it's like, we want to be careful to not overpopulate with retail. And I'll give you an example. We're doing a project right now, my firm in Newton, Mass, that is basically, in some ways it's analogous to this, in some ways it has nothing to do with this, but it's got so much there. We're effectively creating another village in the city of Newton. And I mean, it's massive. And when we started sort of the whole visioning process, which was 10 years ago on this, we had 200,000 square feet of retail and, shops like this and things like that. Today, the project is actually proposed to deliver 35,000. And what the result of that is very thoughtful analysis about how much retail do you need to support the activity level that you're trying to create. We don't want this to read like a shopping center. And so your question about what does it feel like? What is the scale? I'll find some examples for you guys, but I think I just kind of want to balance the response with the idea that this is a community space. Like, this is the town center for Scarborough. It's the center for the Downs. And if we put or try to put too much retail here and it's not going to succeed as retail, then you've killed the entire ability of this to succeed. Because the one analysis that I think is fair over the last 10 years, as people have been adjusting to both the new realities of retail and online shopping, and to take a step 5 years back or 10, the worst thing that you can do is program retail with a hopeful eye towards what you think it's going to be. You have to be really thoughtful about it. And the one thing we know about retail is that people aren't shopping as much in the stores. Retail that's successful in large part is experience-based retail, where you're connecting with a brand that or you're looking at things and then you go home and you may buy online, you may buy in the stores. We want a blend of things like that and really important local business here. So it's kind of a mix of all of these pieces, but this sort of analysis of how much retail and what does it feel like is a really great, but very complicated question. So we'll try to find examples, but I think it's more important to think about the activity level we're going to have here from the community center, from the central amenity, from the restaurants, from the non-pure sort of retail experience, and make sure that the retail experience and the volume that we're providing is accretive to that whole idea and not like something that we're counting on to be the driver.
Yeah, because I think maybe when people, and maybe I'm generalizing just because it's my opinion, but when you think of downtowns, you tend to think of retail. And I just want to make sure the public understands that this isn't that exactly.
Right.
It's something a little bit different, something more Scarborough specific, and the civic piece, I think, is really the differentiating factor. That's really exciting that I know everybody wants and needs.
It's also very unusual, just to be clear, like what you guys are trying to accomplish here with that focus on pure community public space for the town is not usually the way development thinks about this stuff. So I just, this is an exciting project for us, and we're really engaged because of what we think you're trying to do here.
Okay. Well, that's very helpful. I'm trying to read my handwriting. Because Jean Marie asked my question about the build out. So I think that's the challenge I'm having a little bit, like understanding the financial impact based on Jean Marie's question and Dan, your answer is like, according to your numbers, you were showing something by 2028, but then you followed that up with, well, it could be 3 years, it could be 15 years, it could be somewhere in between. So really just trying to understand, like, what's the degree of confidence in some of these things that we're getting from you guys? Again, we don't need to hash that out tonight, but when it comes to making the decision, I just would like to know, like, when we say 2028, 5 times more, is that like a 20% degree of confidence or 100%? Because when you followed that Jean Marie's comment up with 3 to 15 years, I'm like, okay, so that's
No, I
great
didn't mean
on-
to
on-
say it. It's hard to say full build out being 5 years. The 5 years is a big start on the town center. And then we also have other areas that we're still working on that we included in that chart. So we want to be accurate with it. So we have some innovation district completion. So that's the project projection driven by the town center, but there's other numbers in there that make up that total. But we can circle back to clarify that.
Just to add one point, it was also not just based on supply chain and construction, it was based on market realities, which again, I can't tell you I can project exactly what's in 2028, but we do the best we can. So it was all grounded in market absorption.
Mhm. Okay, great. And so again, I think you guys did a great job articulating the public benefit that this will bring. So helping address affordable housing, the financial benefits with the surplus that could even lead to potential, a tax decrease in the future, the community center, just this new town center for the community to gather, which I think is hard to put a value on. And then you talked a little bit, or at least you included in the packet, the TMP and traffic. So I'm really trying to think of like, what are those other things that the town may need an absorption plan on to really address the growth in population and housing that would give me concern about this advancing. And the only thing I can really think of, and I would just ask if you haven't, to connect with the schools to understand, do they have an adequate absorption plan that if we allowed this exemption to go through with the population growth that we would anticipate, are they prepared with their infrastructure to handle it? I know we have the school building committee happening that may be the solution to that, and that may be the way that we're going to address that challenge. But I would just want to make sure that the school has some sort of response to that. And then the only other question I would have, and it's probably more for Tom, because the other thing that came out in our community survey that was the biggest priority, or one of the biggest, was around infrastructure in terms of sidewalks and maintenance of existing town infrastructure. And I would just want to make sure that by building this out, we're not having to support that and not be able to support the existing infrastructure, which may not be an issue, but I would just like to better understand, is there a relationship between this project and our ability to handle existing infrastructure improvements that we need to make in sidewalks and streets and things like that, which again, this seems like it would provide additional funds that we could actually divert to that down the road, which is great, so that we could do more. But I just would like to understand that a little bit better.
Yeah, certainly it's going to affect operations. What's being proposed to be built just is at a level of density and kind of the infrastructure is different than traditional. Most of our roads, the back roads anyway, you have open ditching, no sidewalks, and it's just about plowing lane miles and paving them. These sorts of streetscapes require a whole different level of commitment, from trash removal on a daily basis to even sweeping the sidewalks. So it's about investment in infrastructure. But case in point, with some of the other projects that have come before, rather than buying the big plow trucks that you see going up and down Route 1, we bought two smaller trucks that are more nimble and can actually work themselves better in these smaller environments. So it doesn't necessarily going to cost us more. It's just that we have to be thoughtful about how we make those investments going forward. And I guess the other part is I know my staff's very interested to know, of all this infrastructure, is it all become town responsibility? I suspect a part of it will stay private responsibility in some regards. And so those are very critical details that need to be sorted through and understood.
Okay. So that's all I really had. But again, thank you guys. I thought you did, again, an excellent job. And this was really exciting to see it all come together.
Thank you, John. Councilor Hamel.
Thanks. This was very helpful. I thought the discussion that you led on the concepts of how this would be taking shape and exactly how you're applying principles and trying to get a feel for how the whole thing would work is very helpful. In particular, I really liked what you had to say about the stadium building. I've been wondering for a long time about the viability of that, and it's pretty clear. I mean, I like your statement that it was wildly non-compliant. It was the quotable quote. So thank you for that.
I got dramatic.
Very effective. The other things that you said that I really liked, that you said right at the outset, this is a town center for Scarborough, a community-focused sense of place. So I think you helped to create that vision for us. And so it's exciting, very promising seeing that taking to shape, admittedly at a high level, at a high conceptual level. I would say that there are a couple of things that I'm still struggling with. One is the issue before us is still housing, residential construction. So the concepts and the design that we've seen still don't really give a very good idea of what that would look like, and if I'm playing with numbers, and I know people, we don't want to rush ahead on this, but if we're talking about 500 units and 1,000 people in the downtown center, then, I saw a couple of buildings where there would be retail on the first floor and then housing above. I'm still having a hard time getting my head around what that would look like. So I know that's more to come, but I think in terms of us getting a feel that we're walking in some sort of parallel fashion between supporting residential construction for financing, but also going somewhat in parallel with amenities that are tangible and identifiable. So I know we're getting them in other areas. That's really helping. The Costco announcement, we've got a grocer hopefully that's close to committing. So those will be all good things that I think will help. The second thing that I'm really struggling with, and I know also it's not for tonight, but it's we saw your financials, so it's going to be very important for us to have some time to study those. I know we're doing that in a parallel path, but I think it will be very important for us to try to get our heads around that. I think your projections in terms of the top line growth, seem reasonable, but if that's a top line story, it's not a whole story until we kind of build in the other pieces, the impact, the fees, the real impact on schools, I think, is what numbers I've seen seem very low to me. So those things we'll want an opportunity to verify those. And I'm confident that we will have the time and the deliberate approach to do that. So those are, that would be my feedback. But thank you. Really good start, very promising and exciting and encouraging. So thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? I think none. Tom, do you?
I just had a couple of questions, and maybe if you don't want to answer this level of detail, it's fine. Just looking at the different building sizes and the mass of them, it appeared to be 4 stories, 5 stories. Is that fair? Is that what's the vision?
Yeah, I think that's generally.
And then in terms of the community center, I'm just curious, again, not holding you to it, but what size building were you looking at that would kind of
35 to 38,000 square feet.
Yep.
Okay, that's good. Just I want to appreciate how a building of that size, whether it would meet our needs, but also how it relates to everything else you're doing. And that would be of similar height, I presume, different structure and stories.
I actually think the way we were thinking about that is probably mostly a single story building, potentially with second floor mezzanine, but it could be a full 2. We really have
Just with a peaked roof, but it's probably not materially different in overall height, I suspect.
Yeah, it's probably a little lower, but yeah, you're right. With overall height will be lower, but how much, I'm not sure.
Yeah, again, I was just trying to get a sense of that
Scale.
whole vision and scale. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank you guys for coming. I think it's a great step forward. And I think you've clearly taken the feedback that we've provided to date and put some thought and clearly some resources and money into articulating the vision for Scarborough's town center. So I'm appreciative of that. And like I said, the next step for us is going to be to meet with Levine Consulting and go over your proposal and plan and help us to understand some of the details and a little better clarity, hopefully. That's
just if I could, in terms of timing, Jeff Levine and his co-consultants have preliminary findings, and thank you for all your cooperation in providing them some of the background information. The financials that were presented this evening, I presume that they are an extension of work you've already done. There's not new work.
Yeah, so it's same method, and it's documented in the PowerPoint, and shared as well. Too,
okay.
So I want to be really clear.
The only reason I mentioned that is that I might want the consultants to be privy to what this information is and kind of validate that it's kind of in keeping with what they've already been privy to. And So I think for council's benefit, we could certainly coordinate a meeting within the next couple of weeks. I mean, our schedules need to be coordinated, of course, but I think that consulting team is ready to share some initial findings pending kind of a check-in and a validation of what you heard tonight.
Yeah, we're going to try to lock in a date tomorrow. And again, we're hoping in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
And we can push back the charter thing if you need.
Yes, that is one option. I do want to open it up. We have a number of members of the public here, and I wanted to give them an opportunity to comment if they should choose. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on the proposal or presentation today? Just raise your hand. And Susan Moulton, we are going to ask you to talk now. Susan, I believe you're still muted.
Just come back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. I just have a question about the access to the area. Is it going to remain from Route 1 and Payne only perpetually?
Good question. Dave, do you want to take that?
Yeah, no, there's additional access that would be built onto Haggis Parkway. Paul might be bringing up a plan, but that would actually be the primary access to the town center. And if they're familiar with Haggis Parkway, it would be basically halfway between the salt pump and the Beacon Apartments. There's going to be a main road that would come in and end up where that arrow is on the plan. So
Thank
that would.
Oh, I think there's even a larger plan view too that might show that
Beginning.
better.
Dan, do you mind? Dan, can you just flesh that out a little bit more? Because I do think the Haggis Parkway connection was lost a little bit in the beginning because we all know
Sure.
it. We've seen it a bunch of times.
Yeah.
But I think this would help if you, and I could even zoom in for
Yeah, that's super helpful. So when Paul's done zooming in, the road on the bottom of the screen is Haggis Parkway. Exit 42 and the turnpike is lower.
No, hold on.
Lower left, was lower left.
Look at the walkability.
It's a really big area.
Okay, hold on.
He gets through it quick.
I guess I'm gonna scratch that. Sorry. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So Haggis, yeah, that's Haggis Parkway where the cursor is. Exit 42 is to the left, Route 1 is off to the right. So there's an already approved road by Maine DOT, and we're actually reviewing with the planning board right now, the first segment of it. And so that will be built in pieces and will be the front door, if you will, to the town center. In addition to Payne Road access point as well as Route 1. In addition to that, from Payne Road, what Brian's referred to as Old Downs Road, that'll be rebuilt into a public street with proper lane widths and shoulders so that it can not potholes in the current conditions. So it can be a main access in from Payne Road as well.
Just, Dan, if I could, to put a finer point on that connection, you mentioned that you're currently before the planning board for at least the portion into and across the stream. But in any event, your traffic movement permit requires that connection that, be fully made by 2026.
It does.
And I think I've heard you say in the past that actually the grocer would necessitate that quicker potentially.
Yeah, as would the town center, the first phases of town center.
So 2026 is just to put everyone kind of, is the timeline, kind of the outside timeline of that connection being built and available.
Yeah, and our intention is to start construction later this year on the first segment and then proceed next year into the town center. So that connection will be underway this year and potentially complete at the end of 23, if not early 24.
Thank you for the question, Susan. Next is Marvin Gates. Marvin, you're good to talk.
Hi, can you hear me?
You can.
Hi, it's Marvin Gates at 423 Black Point Road. I have to echo a couple of the counselors' remarks about the very good impression the presentation made. I have one quick comment with two parts, and that is maybe what many are thinking, I don't know, but the difference in scale between what's described as a town center for Scarborough and what's described as a center for the Downs is profound in scale, the difference again. And for my 2 cents, the presentation, I think, was very successful in establishing a center for the Downs. And then the question for those of us who don't live at the Downs is, what draws us in? I think, though, it's still, at least again, from one resident's point of view, I don't quite see yet the idea represented of a town center for Scarborough, or what was used to be referred to as the downtown. So I very much appreciate you allowing me to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Any other members of the public like to comment? Okay. Seeing none, I think we are completed. We can close this workshop. Thank you all for coming.